What's up, everybody? We're looking at Seeing Voices by Oliver Sacks. Oliver Sacks is a neurologist and a writer. He mostly writes about neurological disorders. Uh, this book was nothing like what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be about synesthesia, which is a neurological disorder where a person's senses get cross wired. You can experience numbers as colors, you smell sights, and you see voices. If you watched my last video, you might remember me saying that I needed a good neurology book to wash the flavor of that last one out of my mind. That's why I picked this one. But this book is not about synesthesia at all. It's about deafness, deaf history, language, and education and psychology. This book covers many, many points, but I'm just going to talk about the main ones here. It's structured into three parts. The first and second part are about deafness and language. This is where the bulk of the information is delivered. They discuss so many things I just never would have considered or known. For instance, lesions in the areas of the brain that are critical for language can result in the inability to use sign language, and also lesions in the area of the brain that are critical for spatial awareness and movement do not inhibit sign language whatsoever. This raises a very interesting look at sign language because even though it is a performance of the body, the brain treats it as linguistics. This is fascinating. There's a neurological disorder called hemispatial neglect, where everything on one side of your field of view may as well not exist. You don't see anything on that one side. You shave half of your face. You eat everything on one side of your plate only. Yet this does not apply to the sign language. And these people are not stupid, they just perceive the world differently. Signing doesn't seem to be affected by hemispatial neglect because, as far as the brain is concerned, it's a linguistic act. That's just one of the many interesting things mentioned in this book. The third part was about deaf civil rights, which I promise it was a lot more interesting than it sounds. It covers the first deaf college and a strike that occurred there. That was pretty interesting to read about. So, this book is really filled with interesting information. One of the central ideas is the developmental prospects of congenital deafness versus acquired deafness. What seems to be the most important thing is whether the deafness was acquired before or after the acquisition of a language. We get a lot of information on the cognitive and social developmental deficits suffered by a person who never develops a language. Some of these descriptions are pretty sad and even upsetting. A child can be born deaf, but if the parents learn sign language and communicate with the child regularly, he can develop more or less as normal as anyone else. Time is spent discussing developmental importance of internal monologuing, which requires a language, and how if a deaf child doesn't learn a sign language in time, there can be severe cognitive deficits. They also talk about how a lot of a person's development is based around their peripheral hearing of the interactions of other people. I thought that was pretty interesting. I never really considered just how significant that is. Besides getting a lot of information from psychologists and historians, this book has value for its ability to exercise your empathy by looking into the world of people whose experiences you may never have considered. It should be read for this quality alone. While reading this, I took so many videos and pictures from the book that I wanted to share for this video, but it would be so much better to just experience the book itself. It isn't very long. There are plenty of wow moments, and you get references, a bibliography, an index, and over 60 pages of endnotes. That being said, there were a couple of things I didn't like about the book. Despite being a good book, it wasn't very exciting. When I read it, I did feel like it was time to go to work rather than something I did for enjoyment. And the language was pretty dry. Every time I picked it up, I thought, have I really only read that much of it? It took me a long time to get through this thing, considering it's only 130 pages, not counting the extra stuff. For me, the worst part was that it was just 3 long chapters. There were no subchapters, no subheadings or segments, just one paragraph after another. I really don't like that. You don't really get signposts to let you know where you are. You're just in a sea of text. This only works with the most interesting material, and this was only pretty interesting material. I doubt I'll ever read this again, but I'm glad I did read it. I did enjoy it. I'm glad to have peered into the world of another culture. I think this is an important thing for people to do. This book, though a bit dull, did deliver, and I'd recommend it. It's got ample merits. Well, I think that about does it for this one. Thank you so much for watching this video. I do appreciate that. Is this something you'd consider reading? Do you have deaf people in your life? If you do, or even if you don't, go out and get Seeing Voices by Oliver Sacks.